Okay, we're going to go over airspace. Airspace can be fairly simple, but there's actually, in general, it's pretty simple, but there's actually quite a bit of stuff involved. There's a lot of details that we need to know about. And airspace is going to tie into sectional charts and operating rules of cloud clearances. There's a lot to airspace, but we're going to go over the basics in this section. So for the pictures, I'm going to draw, this will be ground level. So this will be a cross section of the sky. This will be ground level. Ground. All right. All right, so our airspaces are Class A, or A, B, C, D, E, no, not F, G. Okay? Also referred to as Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, and Golf. All right, we're going to start with the easiest one first. Easiest one is way up here, and it runs across the whole sky. All right, ground level. This is not sea level. This is just the ground. All right. So up here we have Class Alpha airspace. Class Alpha. It starts. This airspace starts not from the ground, but from sea level. It starts at, it's everything above 18,000 feet. MSL, above mean sea level. 18,000 feet and above, or above 18,000 feet, is Class Alpha airspace. All of this up here is Class Alpha or Class A airspace. Now when you think of Class A airspace, think airlines. Think airlines. You are not an airline. When you're flying gliders, you're not an airline. You don't belong up there with airlines. So you stay out of that. Class A airspace is, to fly in Class A airspace, you have to have IFR clearance. You have to be instrument rated. So IFR means you're flying under instrument flight rules. You have to have an IFR flight plan, have to have IFR flight clearance, IFR equipped airplane, and instrument rated. None of those are happening in a glider. Okay, so we don't fly up in this airspace, with one exception. But the exception is not what's going to be on the test. The test will not include the exception. But so you know, the exception is if you're flying in wave downstream of say mountain ranges, and you have a mountain, and you have the atmosphere is waving because of winds and a stable atmosphere. If it's waving and you can fly in wave, you can go really high. A lot of guys do this around mountains. So very often you can fly in Class A airspace, but this is an exception where in advance, when the weather is suitable for this, someone will request ATC, or air traffic control. Someone will request that they open up what's called a wave window. And so what it is it's a box. So they basically say, okay, with these these boundaries on the ground, like on a map, with these boundaries, we're going to open up Class A so that you can fly in them, so that the gliders can in fact fly around in this area way up high. And it'll have specific definitions, and it's temporary. It may only be there for 3 or 4 hours. So that is an exception. Don't remember that for the test. For the test, you don't fly in Class A airspace unless you have an instrument flight plan, you're instrument rated, instrument equipped, instrument, no VFR, no visual flight rules flying is allowed in Class A airspace except for this exception. Okay? So when you think Class A, when you think Class Alpha, think airlines. Okay? That's what you need to think about. All right, how about Class B, Bravo airspace? Class Bravo, you need to think big. We're talking big airports. Big airports like Dallas-Fort Worth, Los Angeles, New York, Chicago. There's a lot more than that, but think big airports. Big and busy. All right, so how does this, on the cross section now, we've seen where Class A airspace is. We can fly around in this area, above the ground of course, up in this area up to 18,000 feet. Above that is Class Alpha. We stay out of that. We're not allowed to be up there. You also have to have a transponder. You have to have a Mode C transponder in Class Alpha. I didn't mention that. All right, so Class, we're to B, we're going to go from the biggest down to the smallest. So we're going to start with B. So Class Bravo airspace looks like this. On the cross section, it starts at the ground, of course, at the airport, and it goes out. It goes out from there. So if the airport is centered here, this airspace comes up from the ground and then has a shelf like this, and then it has another shelf like so. Now these come in various shapes, but generally they are round. They're like a round, like an upside down wedding cake. Okay, this is how that's described usually, an upside down wedding cake. So it's a cylinder that comes up, spreads out, spreads out. Now these can be longer and shorter. They can be cut off sometimes, but generally they have this shape with some and maybe some modifications. But this is the general shape. Typically this goes up to a top of around 10,000 feet MSL. You can imagine at a real high altitude airport, the ground could be at say 6,000 feet MSL. This may be significantly higher than that. But this is a typical, you don't need to memorize this. This is just giving you some reference. Another thing Class Bravo has is this thing called a Mode C veil. So there's actually a, well, let's just do it like that. So there's another boundary that we need to talk about with Class Bravo. All right, to fly in Class Bravo airport. Well, first of all, let's talk about what this is all for. This is protected airspace. This is controlled airspace. Now we need to talk about there's controlled and uncontrolled airspace. So all of these are controlled airspace except Gulf, and we're going to talk about that last. Gulf airspace is uncontrolled airspace. It's the only part of this, it's the only airspace that's uncontrolled. We'll talk about it last. So Bravo is controlled airspace, but it's highly controlled. It's controlled more than many of the others. So to fly in this airspace, first of all, you have to have a transponder. In fact, if you're entering this airspace, if you're flying in like this and you're entering this airspace, this is the Bravo airspace right here, which I did not label. So Bravo. All right. If you're entering this veil, this 30 nautical mile veil. So this around the airport, 30 nautical mile radius from the airport. There's this veil that if you're inside this veil, you have to have a transponder. Not just any transponder, but a Mode C transponder. That basically communicates who you are, like what kind of plane you are, and what your altitude is. Okay. Now nowadays, you actually have to have not just a transponder, but also ADS-B, so it can communicates what your plane is, where you are, what direction you're flying, how fast you're flying, all that stuff. So inside the Mode C veil, you have to have a Mode C transponder and ADS-B. Now, once you fly, to come into this airspace, to actually enter the airspace to fly through this upside down cake, you have to establish not just communication with air traffic control, with ATC, but you have to have specific permission to enter the airspace. You have to hear 312 Bravo Charlie, you are cleared to enter the Class B or the Class Bravo. So you don't just establish communication like you do with some others. You have to hear the clearance to enter the Class B airspace. All right, so the reason for this is because there's a lot of big planes. These are big airports. There's an airline landing and taking off like every 30 seconds. This is big, complicated airspace, and so there's big passenger planes flying out of this thing all the time. They're going up to fly in the airline's airspace. So they have constant traffic flying in and out of here. So this is not the kind of traffic that you need to be flying around in a glider in, doing thermals and stuff without a transponder, not paying attention. You're going to run into somebody. So this is highly controlled. Okay, it has its own set of rules for cloud clearances and other things. So you need to know you have to have specific permission to enter this airspace. You have to have specific equipment. You have to have Mode C transponder, ADS-B, two-way radio communication, and on that radio, you have to have clearance to enter the Class Bravo. I can't emphasize that enough. But even to get within this veil, you need Mode C transponder and ADS-B, which most gliders are not going to have. Actually, so let me back up. For a glider, gliders have an exception to this. Gliders are not required to have a Mode C transponder. They currently have an exception. The regs say that all aircraft have to have it. Gliders are an exception to that. So anyway, this is the rules. This is the rules in Class Bravo, with the exception of a glider. Now, a glider still cannot enter the Class Bravo without specific clearance. So anyway, really we're teaching airspace. These are the rules. You got to remember this. Don't just remember the exception for gliders, or it might get you in trouble. So I'm going to label that. This is the Mode C veil. The Mode C veil. All right, that's Class Bravo. So we've looked at Alpha for the airlines above 18,000 feet. That's up high. You have to have oxygen up there. That's way up there. So Class Alpha is for the airlines up high. Class Bravo is this big multi-tiered, this two-tiered wedding cake that you have to have specific clearance and specific equipment to get into. Okay, big deal. You're probably not going to be in Class Bravo airspace. All right, let's move down the line. Class Charlie or Class C airspace. Think crowded. Not necessarily big, but crowded. So this is a medium-sized airport that can be pretty busy. So examples in our area are Lubbock and Midland. Lubbock and Midland are both Class Charlie airports. Okay, what do they look like? So they are similar. The airspace starts at the ground and it tiers up like this. Okay. So they're shaped similar. They're not as tall. They don't go up quite as high. Let's see. They don't go up quite as high as a Class Bravo. So Class Charlie, crowded. But they do have these same two tiers. By the way, these tiers, the height of these and the boundaries are all defined graphically, and the height the boundaries are graphical. The height is defined on the sectional charts, on the VFR sectional charts. It shows how high these things go. It shows the top limit and the bottom limit of these shelves, so you know if you're flying under it or not, or getting into it. Now Class Charlie is this protected airspace is there for the same reason as Class Bravo. There's airlines, there's airplanes, a significant number of airplanes coming out of these, flying up to greater heights, but they're not quite as many. It's not nearly as many as a Class Bravo, so it's not quite as serious of an airspace as far as having to have tight controls. Now to enter a Class Charlie, notice there's no Mode C veil on a Class Charlie. You are required to have a transponder to get into Class Charlie airspace. Okay, transponder is required. A Mode C transponder with ADS-B is required in the airspace, but not required around it. So you could fly all the way down and land at an airport right outside of it, which I do frequently in Lubbock. You can stay under the shelf of the airspace, land at this airport, you can take off, and you never have to talk to anybody. You don't have to have a transponder. You don't have to talk to anybody in Class Charlie airspace, meaning the control tower or the approach controller. All right, let's talk a little bit more about this. So who would you be talking to anyway? Well, actually, let's back up. We'll talk about that another time. So to get in Class Charlie airspace, you just need clearance to get in. They don't say clear to enter the Class Charlie airspace. You establish communications with ATC, and they don't give you specific clearance to enter. When you establish communication with them, you just have to follow their instructions. They'll typically give you headings to fly. When you're in their airspace, typically they're going to be giving you a heading to fly. They're going to tell you continue at 240 degrees, heading 240, or whatever. They'll give you. They're directing your path here. Something significant about Bravo and Charlie is they both have radar. They both have radar. Class Charlie and Bravo have radar, so they can see exactly where you're at. ADS-B is changing some of this because that gives them good visibility of exactly where you're at without radar, but that's not fully developed yet. These are both radar facilities, so they know where you're at, and therefore they can control traffic in the airspace. So something common between Bravo and Charlie is that when you're in their airspace and you are under their control, ATC controls traffic. They control traffic clearances. They give you traffic separation in the air. Okay, this is not the same. We're going to go to another airspace next where they control traffic, but you're always responsible for your own traffic separation. But if they don't have radar, they can't control nearly as well traffic in the air. So you could still run into somebody because they didn't see them. There could be somebody who's not talking on the radio, who's just out there flying, and you didn't see them. ATC didn't see them because they don't have radar, so you have a collision. They will see them in Charlie and Bravo because they have radar. Okay, so you do have to follow all of ATC's instructions, which that makes sense, but you don't have to have explicit clearance to enter the airspace. So if you're communicating with it now, you can't enter the airspace without talking to them. In order to enter the airspace, you have to establish communication with them and then follow their instructions. So it just kind of makes sense. This in Class Bravo, you don't enter that thing. You avoid that airspace until they give you explicit clearance. In Class Charlie, if you're talking with ATC coming up to the Class Charlie airspace, they have radar. They know where you're at. As long as you're in communication with them, you can just fly right into the airspace. No big deal, as long as you're following their instructions. Okay, you just have to be talking with them already. Unless, of course, talking with them, they tell you not to enter the Class C airspace. But anyway, that's common sense. All right. So next is Class Delta. Class Delta. So for Class Delta, think dialogue. Dialogue or talking. All right. I'll explain why that is. Class Delta is not we're going from a two-tiered wedding cake to a single tier to a cylinder now. Just a cylinder. Starts at the ground and goes up as a cylinder. Let's see. Yeah, so Class Delta is a small airport with a temporary tower. Temporary tower. Their towers don't run 24/7. Bravo and Charlie have a control tower that operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Class Delta does not. A great example of Class Delta in our area is Hobbs. Hobbs Airport has a part-time control tower. They operate from about 6 in the morning to about 6 o'clock at night. Then they're shut down. And when they're shut down, it's not Class Delta anymore. It's only Class Delta. This airspace is only a Class Delta airspace when the tower is in operation. As soon as the tower closes, in fact, they'll tell you on the radio, the airspace is now, the airport airspace is now Class Golf, and I'll get to why they say that. But Class Delta is only Class Delta when it's operating. So, how do you get into this airspace? By the way, the Class Delta airspace in Hobbs is right on the edge of Hobbs Industrial. So, if we just fly a little bit to the south of the airport, I mean just like almost right off the airport, when you fly to the south, you're in Class Delta airspace. All right, so it's important to know how to deal with Class Delta. So to enter Class Delta airspace, again, Class Delta you can remember as dialogue. We say dialogue because you need to have a dialogue, you need to talk with the tower. So to enter Class Delta airspace, you just need to establish communication. Establish communication with the control tower. How's that going to be? Do you say, "Hey, control tower, how's it going?" And they answer, and then now you've established communication? No. So when you talk to ATC, you tell them who you are, where you are, and what you're doing. Who you are, where you are, what you're doing. So you tell them who you are by your tail number. Hobbs Tower, November 312 Lima Lima is 5,000 feet just north of the Class Delta, requesting transition into the Class Delta, or I'd like to request inbound for landing, something like that. Whatever you're going to do. Or 312 Lima Lima is above Hobbs Industrial, request transition into the Class Delta, trying to find lift. Let's just say trying to find lift and climb. Whatever you're doing, that's what you tell them. And so when they respond to you with your tail number, when they say 312 Lima Lima Hobbs Tower, and then they tell you something, they say cleared to transition through the Class Delta, or let me know if you get any closer, or whatever they tell you. You've now established communication. Now you have a dialogue with the tower. The dialogue is when they respond to you with your tail number. You give them your tail number, they repeat your tail number. Now you've established communication. Unless they tell you to stay out, you're fine now to go in, because now they know who you are, where you are, what you're doing, and they have some visibility of you. And now they know they can guide people away from you. They can guide other traffic away from you in their airspace. That's the whole idea. But dialogue must be established for Class Delta. Okay? Again, Class Delta is a non-radar facility. They do not have radar here. And because they don't have radar, they cannot guarantee traffic separation in the air. They try. They try to give traffic separation in the air, but mainly they're controlling traffic separation on the ground because they visually look out of the tower and see where the airplanes are at. They do that in the air too, but since they don't have radar, they can miss you. They're not going to miss you on the ground with, from the control tower. So, temporary tower. So, if it's after 6 or whatever time they close, when the tower closes, this doesn't even exist anymore. It's still on the charts, but this is no longer valid. You don't have to do any of that stuff. You fly in there just like you would in any other uncontrolled airport. All right, so that's Class Delta. Class Echo. We're actually gonna skip Class Echo for a second and go to Class Golf. Class Golf, and I'll show you why. So Class Golf is typically referred to as go for it. Class Golf is almost is kind of a anything goes. Class Golf is uncontrolled airspace. Uncontrolled. So where is Class Golf? Well, it's several places, but mainly, if you start at the ground level and go up 1,200 feet, let's go up a little higher. 1,200 feet, AGL, 1,200 feet above ground level, okay, is where Class Echo begins, and we'll go over that here in a second. These are kind of combined. These are very closely related. So Class Golf is down here. The go for it, uncontrolled airspace starts at the ground and goes up to 1,200 feet above the ground, AGL, 1,200 feet. Now at some airports, actually at many airports, there's also, and we'll go over this on the charts, there's also another ring on the charts. It's a faded magenta colored ring around some airports. It can be all kinds of airports. That faded magenta ring tells you that the airspace drops down now. Golf drops down to 700 feet. 700 feet AGL. Okay, so golf in this case drops down like that. Now it turns into Class Delta here. Okay, this can be really confusing. So as you go across the country, not close to an airport, you will see you'll have to know that Class Golf airspace starts at the ground and goes up 1,200 feet AGL. Okay, so it just borders the ground. If the ground goes up, so does that airspace. So, yeah. Now, as you get close to some airports, if they have a magenta circle, a magenta faded circle that we'll go over in the sectional charts, but as they have that magenta circle, that indicates that it drops down to 700 feet AGL. That's pretty low. So that's Class Golf airspace. Class Golf is down here, and I'm just not continuing it, but it's the same thing here. It'll drop down at this one too. Class Golf. Now there's other Class Golf airspace as well. There's not very much of it, so it's almost irrelevant, but we'll show it on the charts when we go over that. So some Class Golf airspace goes up like this. It continues, so you could actually fly pretty high. And so these are really remote airspaces. Okay, really remote. This is the place where you're likely to not even see another plane all day. It's just there's not going on in that region. It's, you know, open desert, open country where nobody lives. There's no airports, or there's very few. That's what class golf is. There's really not much to worry about air traffic, so therefore they don't worry about it. They make it class golf, but there's not much of it. There's very little of it, so not really important for practical flying. All right, so now we're to class Echo airspace. Class Echo you can remember as everywhere else. Everywhere else. So if it's not class Golf, if it's not class Alpha, Bravo, Golf, Charlie, Delta, if it's not that airspace, then it's everything else. Then it's Echo. Echo is everything else. Class Echo airspace is everything that's not the other. Okay? Which kind of makes sense. That means everywhere you're flying here, if you're above 1,200 feet AGL out in the open, and you're not in a class, and you're not above an airport, and you're below 18,000 feet, you're flying in controlled airspace. It's class Echo. It's the least controlled airspace there is. So Alpha, arguably Alpha and Bravo, probably Bravo is the most controlled. Alpha's highly controlled. Charlie is pretty highly controlled. This is less, but still controlled pretty closely. And Echo is the least controlled. Now, that's just kind of for thinking. It isn't a matter of one's more controlled than the other. It's just for thinking purposes. This is controlled airspace. Now, you can fly in this airspace. In fact, I fly in this airspace all the time. And I don't have to even talk to anybody. If I'm flying out here, I don't have to talk to anyone. At a certain point, I have to have a transponder, like at 10,000 feet MSL. If I fly above here, I have to have a transponder. You have to have ADS-B above 10,000 feet MSL. Mode C transponder and ADS-B. Why? Because this is where the bulk of the non-class Alpha traffic is at. A lot of the traffic, high speed, IFR, and just high speed traffic is flying in this area very frequently. So you have to have a transponder. They want to control that tighter. Down here, you don't have to have a transponder. You don't even have to tell them where you're at. They don't know where you're at. If you're in a non-radar environment, you can just be flying around here and just watching out for folks. Okay? I think we have covered the basics of the airspaces. Those are the general categories, the 6 categories of airspace. This gets way more complicated when you get to the VFR charts, but that's what we got here. So, class Alpha airspace. Think airlines. It's above 18,000 feet MSL. Class Bravo airspace is this big 2-tiered upside down wedding cake. Think big airports. That's DFW, LAX, like Los Angeles, Dallas, Fort Worth. Big cities, big airports, lots of planes flying in constantly. That's class Bravo. You have to have, class Bravo has that mode C veil around it, remember. So you have to have a transponder inside here, inside the mode C veil, 30 nautical miles out. You have to have specific clearance to enter the class Bravo airspace. They have to tell you cleared to enter the class Bravo. Okay? Class C is like Lubbock or Midland or no, not Roswell. Lubbock or Midland Airport. Think crowded if the memory aid helps. It's still pretty crowded. There's a lot of traffic flying in and out of there, but nothing like a class Bravo. So to enter the airspace, there's no requirement outside here, but to enter the actual airspace, you have to have a transponder, mode C transponder, and ADS-B to enter the airspace. And you just have to be talking with them and following their instructions. Okay? Class Delta, remember? Delta for D for dialogue. You have to establish communications with the control tower. They have to respond with your tail number before you can enter their airspace. All right, pretty simple though. Remember, these are temporary control towers. So this airspace disappears, turns into class Echo, or they'll say It is now Class Golf airspace. What they're referring to is the airspace right above the airport, because when the control tower is off, we now have a 700 foot. The airspace up to 700 feet AGL is now Class Golf. That's why they say that if you ever hear the control tower shut down at night. All right, so temporary tower. And then Class E, Class Echo, is everywhere else. Everywhere else, except for Class Golf, everywhere that's not one of these other ones is Class Echo airspace. Still controlled airspace. Class G is go for it. You don't have to talk to anybody. You don't have to have any special equipment. You can just fly as free as you want to fly in Class Golf airspace, with the exception of cloud clearances, which we'll talk about. At another time. All right, that's the overview of airspace.